Hello, and welcome to the Meta Woman podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay the Boss Boss. Together, we're going to have conversations about what it's like to be a woman in the gaming industry, how we can better support people in the gaming industry, and what we can do to build a better environment for all. To our returning listeners, thank you so much for supporting the show. And for new listeners, welcome. I hope you enjoy the show. I'm so excited to introduce our guest this week, Cecile Matthews. Cecile is the CEO of Gamerabble, an online coaching platform designed to offer tailored programs to individuals. Gamerabble focuses on helping players meet their goals while allowing coaches flexibility to set their own rates and schedules. Cecile, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So to start, would you be able to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, a couple sentences of introduction and a background?
Sure. So as you said, I am the co-founder and CEO of Gamerabble. We're a coaching, training, and development platform for players of all ages and skill levels. We built Gamerabble after thinking of helping to get my son, who's a video game fanatic, into esports. But we couldn't find anyone we were comfortable with. And as we looked more into it, most everything on the coaching side seemed to be very male and testosterone driven, which was quite off-putting.
You know, I've talked to a couple moms about how they got into the gaming industry, and it's so funny how many moms have wound up starting their own businesses just because they didn't like what was out there. Which kind of brings us to our first topic, which is when it comes to entrepreneurship and gaming, we're at the start of explosive growth. It really feels like people are able to build things from the ground up. The problem with that is that the more established companies are definitely having problems in creating work environments that reach equal parity for women. And it was, unfortunately for me, it was a little bit hard to actually find statistics on small businesses and how many of them are actually owned by women. But there was some on the bigger picture businesses. A 2020 study found that of the top 14 global gaming companies, 84% of executive positions in the gaming industry are held by men. And outside of those executive ranks, only 24% of those working in the industry are women. And unfortunately, there was an even worse survey, which of women in the UK who worked in the gaming industry, where about half, around 45%, felt that their gender was a limiting factor in their career progression. And 1/3 noted they had experienced direct harassment or bullying because of their gender, which just does not paint a very good picture for women entrepreneurs or even women who are looking for a more traditional career path to enter the industry. So can you talk a little bit about what it's been like for you as a woman and as a CEO to build a business in the gaming industry?
Yeah, I think there are opportunities, but we've got a long ways to go. As you alluded to, whenever we think we're making progress, whether it's in character design or addressing workplace issues, we take another step back with situations like what's going on at Activision Blizzard. So that being said, people are being held responsible for their behavior now when before, it could be swept under the rug. On a positive note, when I look around, I do see women entrepreneurs in the game industry having success. And I know people in senior positions at game publishers. I see leaders of industry organizations who are women. We have coaches who are women. I think there are similarities to what women entrepreneurs face in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And there are challenges and less representation, but there are opportunities, and more women are establishing themselves and finding success.
How do you see it do you kind of see an opportunity for women at these more entrenched cultures? Like, do you see things changing there as well as in the entrepreneurial space? How do you see that balance?
Yeah, I think that there are opportunities to see change in the culture for both established organizations, established companies, established players, and establishing your own company, right? Like, so you've talked about you've met other people who don't see something that they like in the marketplace, so they set out and create it themselves. So I do think anything's possible. When we look at something like the traditional sports industry, right? So the introduction of things like the WNBA and the growth of women's soccer, it is an ongoing battle, but progress has been made and continues to be made. We see women coaches, officials, people on and off the field, and in other professional sports. We see women leading the way in sports like snowboarding and beach volleyball. So I think both establishing new culture and changing old culture is possible, perhaps with varying degrees of success.
Yeah, that's what I always kind of think about is I mean, this is very personal of me specifically, but I think it's so much harder to change an entrenched culture. Like going into a place and getting people to actually have an open mind when they've been doing things for so long feels so daunting. Whereas when you have the opportunity to start your own business, it feels like there's more chances just to lead the way that you would want to be led at another company. So I don't know if that was, I mean, if you could talk about a little bit your motivations with starting your own business. I know part of it was your son, but what did you see that was kind of lacking when you were looking for coaching platforms, and how were you able to incorporate that into your own platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, I am one of those people who believes that you should be the change you want to see. And so I think that, that's a great point to make about what did I see was lacking. When I think about what Gamerabble is trying to do, we're trying to we have kind of these core values. We're trying to create a community in a place that's more inclusive, more approachable, and fun. So I feel like when you look at a lot of the other, we'll just say gaming coaching, esports coaching sites specifically, they look very serious, right? A little bit intense,
right? Yeah.
Sometimes kind of intimidating. Like my son was joking with me today, and he was like making that scowling, pose thing. And I was like, yeah, exactly. Like we kind of wanted to bring the fun back into gaming, right? Especially for the younger players, so college, high school, club level players. That you don't have to be the scowling kind of serious player to be good, right? Like you can have a lot of fun, and you're playing, right? So that's one of the things that we're very conscious about incorporating into what we offer.
Well, I like that you bring that up because we actually, so for those of you that don't know, I'm also a part of the Business of Esports team. We do a live after show where I kind of get to be a little bit of a gaming pundit, and we go over some of the current news. And we actually had a story not that long ago about I believe it was CSGO, where at the tournaments, they stopped allowing coaches and players to high five. Did you see this story, Cecile?
I think it was the podcast where I saw something about like silencing game coaches, and then I kind of had to read up a little bit, but something about like no touching, and then cheering sounded like it might have been
well, to be fair, part of that story is that I swear it was CSGO, but part of the story was that they had a massive cheating problem. So this was supposed to be wrapped into kind of the measures that helped address the cheating. But all I saw was a way of forcing players and coaches to do the extremely old style of, we're here to win and you can't think of anything else and you can't have fun. And as a former athlete, those are the coaches I always did the absolute worst with. So I like that part of what you focus on is actually finding a way to have fun in the game.
Yeah,
I think it's so natural
to enjoy, what you're doing. It's video games at the end of the day, right? So we have that philosophy.
Well, I like that too, because I actually think it helps address some of the toxicity. I think that there's a really quick tendency to kind of fly off the handle and get into rage. And as someone who lives with a gamer, I've seen that happen a couple times. And I've asked him, why do you play this game if you're getting so mad at it? What are you doing with your time? Like, this doesn't seem like fun. So I don't know. So is there any thing in your coaching platform that I know that you hire coaches who intentionally try to bring the fun back, but is there any type of training or anything like that you offer to help people actually focus on, not getting to that point where they're expressing their anger and instead, like you said, at the end of the day, it's video games, enjoying themselves?
Yeah. So I would say that, we've intentionally recruited coaches to the platform that have experience working with younger people and are conscious of developing good gamers, right? So kind of developing or implementing good habits from an early stage of gamesmanship, right? Like, I mean, just like any other sport, you want the players to be good sports, and to realize, it's fine to want to win. It's fine to want to compete and to be competitive. But you also have to be a good sport. You have to be respectful. So, a lot of the clubs, leagues, that our players are wanting to participate in, say at their for their high school team, have rules and regulations, and are also putting into place things, processes and systems that are going to help players maintain good behavior and try to develop them as players. So as they continue and as they play maybe more mature titles, they'll maintain that perspective. I think that something else that we've noticed is we have at least one coach who's focused on performance, and so not just the coaching the game itself, right? So mental preparation, right, and having the right mindset. So I think that's another thing that we'll start to see more of is not only thinking about how to play the game, the specifics of it, but kind of how to have the right mindset to optimize your performance. And so part of that is probably controlling your emotions.
Right. Well, and I think that's a great point, because one of the things is I finally feel like we're moving out of this gamers live in their mom's basement kind of attitude. And so one of the things that's been happening lately that I see more and more is it's not just parents kind of getting involved in the industry, but it's gamers actually growing up and being involved in the industry. So to me, it's like if we can start these habits younger in people, then maybe we'll just all grow out of the toxicity a little bit too. Like it won't be cool anymore to hurl insults all the time. So I don't know if have you kind of seen that translate, or have you seen, like, as the stereotypes kind of shed from this gamers are only in their mom's basement, do you think, like, more growth in how people are treating each other in game?
Well, I think it still depends, kind of back to the other part of our conversation. It kind of depends on which games you're talking about, right? So some of the games just kind of lend themselves or maybe attract a crowd where when they're playing the game, they kind of transform into a very, kind of aggressive, maybe personality. But other games kind of lend themselves to, you're still competing, but maybe a little less intensely, with a little less, like violent fervor, right? Like, like if I'm picturing games, right? Like, the difference. So, one of our most popular coaches is the Rocket League coach, right? So it's just a whole different kind of vibe when you're playing like, a sports game, a sports-based game like that versus, some of the other titles, I think.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, now to circle back to kind of what I brought you on for, which was to talk a little bit more about Gamerabble's ethos and all of that. And one of the things that I really love is on your website, you note different age ranges. So we've talked a lot about younger folks in gaming and how you've been able to incorporate them on the coaching platform. But I like that your website also points out that older folks still have room to grow and learn how to have fun and play new games. So can you just talk a little bit about the demographics on your site and how successful it's been and how you've been able to incorporate different ages?
Sure. Well, thank you. One of our goals in starting Gamerabble was to democratize esports and video game coaching. And there are a couple of reasons behind that. So first of all, Gamerabble recognizes that you have to be more than a good player to be a good coach. And there are a lot of people out there who would make great coaches, but weren't getting the opportunity. So offering an online marketplace allows the market to decide what services get bought and sold, and it makes it easier for a broader range of people to become coaches. And it also makes it easier for players of all ages, levels, to find coaches that are a good fit for them. And as far as our demographics and how successful this approach has been, As of right now, we're still seeing a slant towards the 20-somethings, but we're getting ready to roll out something specifically geared to the teens crowd. And we're still trying to break into the graybeard demo of people who just want to show up their friends and coworkers. But we're constantly getting feedback, and we're always listening to our customers, and we continue to make adjustments based on what users tell us. And we're just really happy to do that.
That's great. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about how players actually do get matched on the platform? Like, is it player choice, or is there a matching process, or what does that look like?
So for the most part, on the online marketplace, a coach will post their profile and offer sessions, right? So different packages. And then someone who's seeking coaching will come onto the site and search through the coaches. So they might look for a certain game, and then, coaches who specialize in certain skills. So for the most part, it's driven just by the player and what they're seeking. That being said, we have a partnership with NASEF, the North America Scholastic Esports Federation, and with them, we're working on developing a little more of the matching thing that you're talking about. So we're working on developing some programs that help designate certain coaches as skilled, maybe they'll, have certain training that prepares them to work with NASEF clubs. And so in that sense, there maybe down the road, or maybe at some point, there will be some kind of a matching process, but at least in the initial stages, it's more of preparing the coaches for the expectations, or making sure they're prepared to coach teams at that level.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay. So it's a little bit of a customer's choice at the moment, is what it sounds like, which is great. I mean, that allows a lot of flexibility for the people who are actually paying for services. So that works well. I wanted to, because this is a woman-focused podcast, but I also want to talk about inclusivity in general, which is why I brought up the age bit, because as a woman who's getting older, I very much appreciate when things are geared towards different ages and not just towards the teen crowd. But you are also, you work with a lot of different people on your platform, I know. And I know in a previous conversation, you mentioned wanting to include aspects of inclusivity. So how are you working towards building an inclusive environment, towards reaching gender parity, towards getting minorities involved? What does that look like for you? And do you have any advice to people who are building businesses on what they can do?
Okay, great. Yeah, there are a few ways. So for starters, because the online marketplace is open to anyone, it provides access to those who might not otherwise be able to participate. So when you think of it as a Fiverr for a video game, players who want to coach now have a platform to reach potential customers without having to figure out how to advertise their services and process payment. So that's one piece of it. We also make coaching, training, and development opportunities available for more than just the most popular games, which enables us to serve more people. And we offer services other than just game coaching, things like video game photography and that mental performance coaching. We offer individual coaching and team coaching. So that kind of broadens the pool as well, both on the player side and the coaching side. And one of the most important things we've done is we have specifically sought out coaches that we feel fit our ethos and can bring more than just coaching to our community. So I think, as we talked about in that previous conversation, we're a very people-driven company. We are small enough right now that we believe in, as much as we can, getting to know, the people that we work with, and them getting to know us. And, we have, certain core values that we think are important as we, move this business forward.
Yeah, and I think that people-driven is one of the words that gets tossed around a lot. And I know that at larger companies, it does tend to get a little bit harder as you grow. So how have you been able to maintain that while you're continuing to kind of add to your platform?
Yeah, so I think that, right now it's me and my co-founder, my husband, who are handling most of the day-to-day operations, and the things that we don't do ourselves are entrusted to team members. So we're very we're very careful about hiring people who also believe, in the same things or hold the same values that we do as related to the company and the direction that we're trying to go, as well as, just the identity that we're trying to maintain. So I think that, right, as like you said, as we grow, it will become more challenging. But I think the way that we plan to, attack it is by being very conscious, if not vigilant, about who we hire, who joins our team.
Gotcha. So for you, when we're talking about things like bringing women into the industry, I would assume that part of the hiring process is kind of just, and it might be a little bit easier, as a woman and particularly as a minority woman, to sort of ignore all of the other stereotypes. But do you have any advice or things that you'd like to see larger companies do that sort of take that people-driven approach? I know that's a broad question, and I know you're a person who currently runs a smaller business, but I would just be curious to see like what types of things that you've done that you wish you could see in the broader industry to actually be more inclusive of people who look like you.
Yeah, so I have been, I would say, the beneficiary of programs designed to diversify the workforce. So, one of my previous positions was with Major League Baseball, but the way that I entered was as part of their executive development program. At the time, it wasn't actually about recruiting women and minorities to the business side of baseball. It was about bringing in people with non-baseball, or giving an opportunity to people without baseball backgrounds to work on the business side. And so I was coming out of my MBA program. And so I do believe programs like that are good opportunities to give people, a broader group of people, a chance to join industries or organizations that are looking to expand the diversity of their workforce. So I do believe in programs. I do believe in a lot of the organizations that have diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I think a lot of those are, the really large organizations that are able to have departments dedicated to that. I think they're doing some excellent work and making progress. And, I have friends who work on that side of it, and I really like what I'm seeing there. So there's a lot of things that I think many of the larger companies are doing well, and I just hope it continues to grow.
Right. For me, I'm waiting for the world in which those kinds of programs and those kinds of opportunities are, instead of reactive, are sort of commonplace. I do unfortunately feel as if a lot of things have been added thanks to very negative things, which is a positive result. But I'm just looking forward to the day when those aren't thought about as a way to stench the flow of bad media, and instead are built with diversity and inclusion in mind. So I think it's great to point out that companies are doing more now. I just want that motivation to be there from the beginning.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what you were saying before. I agree that sometimes programs only get introduced as kind of a damage control, right? And so as more professionals, I guess, are developed through these kinds of systems, I think we will see people who think that way kind of from the start, right? Like that's kind of natural or second nature to them, to have that lens as they view the work that they do.
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm hoping we move towards. And it seems like we're going in the right direction. It's just that progress is a little slow for my taste, but progress is still progress. It's just, we'll get there. I would love to touch on some of your MLB experience because, gaming gets compared to to traditional sports a lot, esports especially, and professional gaming. I'm not positive that there's necessarily a one-to-one comparison. I think they're very different. And, in the business of esports, we've talked a lot about the differences between them, but that doesn't mean that working in a professional sports organization doesn't sort of translate at least somewhat to the gaming industry. So what are those overlaps like for you? And how do you think about traditional sports versus professional gaming and kind of the connection between the two?
Yeah. I was thinking about it this morning of how, professional sports, the major sports like MLB, NFL, NBA, uh, the 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 viewership for some of these sports is still very high, especially for their marquee events. So we'll just say the Super Bowl, right? But I think, there's so much data out there that supports that kind of on a daily basis, on a more consistent basis, there is super high engagement with gaming as an entertainment platform or as a form of entertainment, right? So people watch it, people play it, they get different things from it. They socialize via gaming, they relax via gaming. So it's interesting because you think about like sports. Some people throw on a game, they just want to sit back and relax at the end of the day and watch a game. Some people have that now with gaming, right? And similar, another entertainment kind of property that is, in the similar kind of idea or field is movies or TV, right? Like you just want to throw it on, consume it. And so I kind of see that that's one part of, the similarities between esports and video gaming and traditional sports. But esports and gaming are in its very early stages. And so that means that, there's a lot of room to grow as kind of the time that, especially I would say the younger generations are spending on traditional sports is now shifting towards esports.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also do think that there's totally different stories depending on the sport. I mean, I'm a huge NBA fan. I played basketball for 17 years. I played it in college. Like I grew up with basketball. So the NBA totally has my heart. But what I've really seen that's cool with the NBA is that they're reaching into esports partnerships and developing things that reach more out to gamers and getting in on the culture. Because I do think gaming is really tied to, music culture and fashion culture and sports culture. But I think that some leagues have really stepped up in terms of those partnerships. And I think the NBA has stepped up the most. I'm totally biased, but they've just done such a good job of encouraging that. And so many NBA players stream and talk about streaming and all that stuff. So I wonder like what the MLB is going to kind of do to counter that. And I wonder do you have any ideas about what kind of the future of professional sports looks like with gaming?
I don't have a ton of inside information related to that. I remember after we spoke the first time that an article came out, or I got something in my email the same day about MLB doing something with esports. But I will say that, I think it just didn't strike me as like, oh my gosh, this is, as kind of big as what I've seen in other leagues do. So that could have been just me. Like it just, kind of got lost in the shuffle. Like I just had so many things that I was thinking about that it didn't make a huge impression on me. But I think like we were talking about with other things, like progress can be slow depending on, which industry or organization within the industry. But that being said, I think that, the force of the influence of gaming is probably hard to ignore. So they're going to have to figure out, how they're going to become involved and, what they want to do to kind of partner and activate around it. And so I can see how that's, kind of a big area to explore and really, try to figure out how to do it effectively.
Yeah, well, and with that, I will say we're talking about all these professional sports leagues, and they're all male leagues. So there still is the problem of getting women's leagues the same amount of attention, or just the same amount of interest. And as a former female athlete, I'm the first one to admit that they're very different sports. Even when they're the same sports, women's versus men's strategy can look completely different, and building a fan base can look completely different. I wonder, do you feel the same way about women in esports? Because obviously women in professional gaming are also having the same sort of difficulties in reaching parity and building the followings and all of that. Just as a quick aside, I know that Valorant has been able to do it a little bit better because they launched they launched in a shooter industry that's typically very male dominated, but with very stringent rules about how you can speak to each other and what you can do on the platform. And it's kind of a day one expectation that everyone was going to be treated equally. And so I think as a result, like, women's viewership of Valorant is much higher, and there's all women Valorant teams and all of that. But I mean, if we're following the same path of traditional sports for men and women, like, I'm not super excited for esports. I think there's an opportunity to do a lot more. But between your experience in professional sports and now working in the gaming industry, how do you see the development of of professional esports, and how do we do a better job of including women?
Well, so I think that one of the things that you kind of hit on is some of the sports that are maybe taking longer to change or to make progress in are the ones that are maybe have been around longer. So they're kind of like we were talking about before, more entrenched, more traditional. And so I think that because esports is kind of a modern form of entertainment, and because it's really growing up in the maybe the last 30, 25, 20 years, right? Because people are kind of from a different generation, at least. I'd like to think that we are starting at a point that's closer, and more people are, even though it's not close to parity, there are more people who are interested in, active in, playing and continue to play. But I mean, I think that you're right, though, that the fact remains that there are lots of people. So another project that I've been involved with, and I mean, it was a while ago now, so it's kind of dated, but I think similarly, we've made some progress, but some things are still the same. So another project I worked on was the Women in Sports, like how to attract, retain, and monetize women in sports. And it was kind of it was a project for ESPN. And so, back then we were looking at, there's a lot of people who play, right? So former players, there's people who still play, weekend warriors, and then there's people who are, spectators. They like to watch with their friends, their family. So there's a few different personas, right? But it's still just less than for sports. It's fewer women are fans, spectators, everything than men. But I would like to think, because there are more women participating and, becoming involved with esports earlier, that we'll be able to kind of retain and grow them, more of them, I guess, over time.
That's a really good point. And I can see what you're saying. Just to kind of sum that up, essentially, I think what I'm hearing is that sports are more geared towards men and more towards men's interests, but gaming seems to not have as strong of a hold over just men. I think it's possible also because gaming is a much wider industry. Sports are very narrow, and very skill based and ability driven. Whereas gaming, like, as one of my friends say, everyone is a gamer if they find the right game. So there's just a lot more room maybe in the gaming industry for women to carve out a niche, whereas sports are pretty kind of cut and dried in what you can do and what you can't do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that we haven't even broached before, is that, I've heard from other people when we talk about esports and how it how it enables people who wouldn't necessarily be able to participate in a team sport to play,
Mm-hmm.
right? So people who don't
Yep.
necessarily have the physical ability to be on the football team are now playing on the esports team, and they're actually playing
Mm-hmm.
alongside somebody who also plays on the football team, right? So it really just kind
Right.
of brings together people who might not have played together otherwise, and to a certain extent levels the playing field, because it's not based on, size or,
Right.
coordination or, coaching of, how much time they've spent playing a different, a traditional sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely, yeah, I think that's, yeah, we're saying the same thing, but the point is that there's a much wider base. So hopefully when people are building leagues and things like that and doing creating professional opportunities, there's kind of a recognition that, hey, it actually doesn't matter as much. Some of these physical attributes that you might need to play real sports, which is so wild to think about. As someone who played real sports and who had a coach one time say that she recruited really tall women because you can't teach height, which I had never heard. There's definitely fewer limitations in the gaming industry, and there's coaches available for everyone to work on their skills. So makes it a little bit easier. Well, as we sort of wrap up here, one thing that I like to do at the end of every episode is kind of offer a moment of reflection. We've talked about a lot of things here, which has been great. We've talked about, incorporating more professional programs for women, getting more kind of women on platforms and into job positions where they can be successful, and also just kind of focusing on the people part of job hiring and that kind of thing. Talked about how there's an old culture versus a new culture. There's a way for entrepreneurs to build things that they don't actually see out in the world quite yet. And that opening is kind of there right now because we're still in the youth of this industry, I would say. And for you, I would just love to end with one final question that I like to ask every guest, which is, what is one thing you would like to tell your younger self about getting into the gaming industry and being successful?
Sure. Great question. I think that something that I've learned over the years is that uh, if you want to be happy in your work, you should make it a priority to work with or for people that your values are aligned. That you and the company that you really believe in the mission of the company that you work for, and you feel a strong, I guess, alignment or affinity with what they're trying to do, as well as the people that you'll be working with or for. I just think that, it's so easy to get caught up in picking a job because of, the salary or the title or something else. But when I look back at, my career so far, I think that I have been happiest when I've been able to work with or for people, who I just really, feel aligned with in terms of, the values and, the purpose, I guess, of what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay, so I was going to let you have the final word, but I have to chime in because that is just so apt for kind of what we're seeing. And this is a little bit outside the gaming industry, but across all industries, we're experiencing the great resignation, and people are finally, and honestly, this is advice I wish I had had 6-8 months ago when I was at a place where I wasn't doing so great mentally for myself. And so I think saying that and saying that you should believe in what you work in and not take a job just because it looks good on paper or because it has a really high salary. If it's making you miserable, you should leave it behind. So I think that's really good advice for anyone, not just women in the gaming industry. And I think it's a lot of what we're seeing these days. So I would love to let you have the final word if you have any other thoughts on that, but I just had to throw that in there given current events.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, you're right that, so now, I think that, it's just the reality that sometimes you have to take a job that you don't like but don't stay in it longer than you have to, right? Like realize
Yeah.
that, I'm just doing this to pay the bills, but I really need to find something that's better aligned with, what I want to do or what I believe in, or like, I've really kind of discovered a lot about like this intentionality thing, right? But yeah, we all have to pay our bills. So that's one thing. Like sometimes you have to be in a job that you don't like, but don't get stuck there, right? Really start thinking about, what's your plan and, how am I gonna, get to where I want to be, like, where do I want to be and how am I going to get there so I can be, happier and more fulfilled.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to end. Yeah. And the intentionality thing. I like it. And it's true. And you're very right about opportunity. Because yes, some people unfortunately can't afford to do that. But if you can, don't stay somewhere where you're miserable. That's for sure. Cecile, thank you so much for coming out today. It's been such a joy talking to you once again. For all of our listeners, make sure you check out Gamerabble for all of your coaching needs. And if you're interested in being a coach, highly encourage you to apply and send your resume off to Cecile. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. It was great having you.
Yeah, thank you too, Lindsay.